the best designed cards in the history of Hearthstone. You guys voted. These are the results. Starting with number 10, it's Wild Pyromancer. But actually, it was legit Boulder Fist Ogre. You idiots voted for Boulder Fist Ogre as a meme so consistently that he legitimately made it to the top 10, but I refuse to accept that he's well designed. He's way too OP. Insane body for his cost. So instead, I took the number 11 card, which is Wild Pyromancer, put it in here for the number 10 spot. And indeed, Wild Pyromancer is a really well-designed card. It always felt like it was one of those cards that has such high output. Like it does a lot, right? This repetitive whirlwind effect. And we've seen it utilized in some really cool situations. You know, Paladin comes to mind with Equality is this insanely cool board clear. But we've also seen random other things where it's just, you know, a great way to answer token boards. You can give this thing lifesteal. It has crazy applications there. We've seen this minion get poisonous before that does crazy stuff too. So there are all these different angles of attack for Wild Pyromancer, and sometimes it's great as just a whirlwind. Sometimes it's doing something more, but it's a card that just does so much, but it still doesn't feel too powerful because it requires follow-up and combination. So it does feel like one of those classic cards that stood the test of time, still relevant even today occasionally, and indeed, I think that makes it a really, really nice design. Next up here at the number 9 spot, it's Lord Jaraxxus. Your world is still doomed. And Jaraxxus still getting votes years and years past his relevance. And I totally understand why. Jaraxxus, I think it's all about the flavor. There are some cool design elements here. This was the first hero card that wasn't really a hero card, but the first thing that transformed your hero, and it was such a big card and it was iconic, and so many great moments out of this one. And I had those great moments too. The first time I saw this played, it blew my mind. I didn't understand how it could be real. The dude just transformed. He got an insane weapon. His hero powers cranking out 6/6s. It just totally refocused and reshifted what I thought was possible in Hearthstone 5-6 years ago, whenever that was. Jaraxxus creates those insane reactions and moments. And I think that's why it stands out so much for all of us. So from a design standpoint, like mechanically speaking, you know, as Jaraxxus is just kind of tossing everything in there, but it's so big and it's so enormous in its impact that it's probably a good design. It needed to be big. It needed to be memorable. You needed that giant weapon, the high durability weapon, and the big minions to make it count and make it have that oomph. And I certainly think Jaraxxus delivered. Moving on here to Deathstalker Rexxar. And this is one that I think unfortunately got a little bit soured late in its standard format rotation when it became an actually meta-relevant card. It was pretty powerful there. It was defining a lot of games, just cranking out zombies every turn. They were powerful minions. You'd eventually overwhelm people, and it would serve as this in-game sort of infinite resource generator win condition. And that could be a little bit frustrating to know that, like, oh, I just can't, as a control deck, I can't grind out Rexxar. I'll never be able to win. And we see that a little bit today with things like even Galakron Priest. But before that, before Rexxar was good, there was a period, I don't remember how long, maybe 6 months, couple expansions, maybe 8 months, right? When there weren't many lifesteal beasts in the pool yet, where Rexxar wasn't competitive, but he was ridiculously fun to play because you knew you were playing this card that just had this amazing mechanic, stitching these beasts together. And it was always cool trying to figure out which beasts were exactly right for the moment and what kind of crazy zombies you could build. Those were the times where Rexxar felt like an incredibly well-designed card before his competitiveness sort of outweighed his enjoyment level. I'll think back to those days very fondly, and I still enjoy playing Rexxar, I think, even if he did get good, just because it's so cool building zombies. It's a really fun idea that would be hard to execute in any other format other than a digital card game that Hearthstone did so well. Moving on here to Cthun. I was really happy to see this one on the list. It's probably not one I would have thought of right away, but in hindsight, after you guys voted for it, I was like, yeah, Cthun is a really interestingly designed card. He absolutely captures the old god feel and flavor incredibly well. This idea of all these like loyalists, these cultists following him, building him up, worshiping him, and then eventually he's unleashed upon the world in often a game-ending fashion with an enormous board impact and sometimes a ton of face damage as well. That felt really cool. That was a good storyline. I think a lot of the old gods delivered on that, you know, impending doom or like, world-shattering kind of play when they hit the board, but they didn't have that setup and that build-up that Cthulhu had. And although, from a competitive standpoint, sometimes it's hard to commit all those cards and build that out. He certainly did see some competitive play. So, the other old gods were probably more flexible in many cases, got played more often in a lot of cases as well. But Cthulhu, everybody got him. We got all the Cthulhu cards for free. So it just felt like this shared experience that we all had. Competitive, but not overpowered. Great storyline. Anybody who played World of Warcraft, this was one of the early bosses in the game. So very iconic boss to fight and remember as well. So all in all, Cthulhu just absolutely delivered on the old gods premise perfectly. So next up here is Tarcreeper, and this is one I'm kind of surprised to see on the list, just because it seems like a card that you'd forget about or would slip through the cracks, but absolutely deserving as far as I'm concerned. A card that completely shifted how we think about early game defensive taunt minions. In the past, often you'd see things getting co-opted into aggro decks, because it turns out an aggro deck playing a kind of annoying, high friction, sticky taunt in the early to mid game could really help protect and shore up all the minions they'd played thus far. The aggressive minions were suddenly hidden behind a taunt. And anytime you made a good taunt card, it's like, oh god, this is going to be good in an aggro deck. But Tarcreeper really limited that by lowering the attack value of the card when it's on offense, but still retaining the ability to trade in nicely on defense, because that 3 attack is a nice breakpoint, hitting those 3/3s and even some 2 health minions in the early game. So it was a really cool idea to specifically bias this card towards defense. Now, of course, it still popped into some tempo decks and some aggro decks here and there, but it was a great step forward that we hadn't seen in Hearthstone before, and I thought it was a really elegant design. So you get this great stat line on defense, but you can't really flip the script and use it offensively and cause problems for your opponent. That was so welcome, and that's why Tarcreeper was an incredibly popular card. Both just like people loved it, it felt balanced and good to play, but it was also played in a lot of decks as well. And he absolutely is a perfect epitome of what should be on this list. All right, so next up here is Zephyrus, and clearly this is a card that people are going to be mixed on. Some people think Zephyrus is a terrible design because it bails you out of any situation, and it's like, this solve all problems kind of card. But the other side of people kind of recognize here the technical achievement of Zephyrus and how cool it is that a card like this can exist in the first place. And, depending on the day, I'm probably torn between those two groups, but you certainly have to recognize Zephyrus is really cool from an execution standpoint. Like Blizzard pulling this off, first off, is just such a monumental task to even tackle in the first place. And then they really did deliver on it. Of course, he's wacky here and there and he gets weird things going wrong. But for the most part, the sort of algorithm they developed for Zephyrus seems to do what you want it to most of the time, which I think is pretty cool. And then you've got this flavor tying in, this genie that's granting 3 wishes that fits so well in the Discover mold of Hearthstone and wishing for that perfect card. It's just kind of perfect. It came together so well. And yes, he's a very powerful card. Yes, he's warped the meta around him. But if you're going to have a card be that impactful, isn't it kind of nice that it's one that was so thoughtful and so much effort was put into, and clearly a lot of love and care were put into as well? I kind of think it is. So I don't really mind Zephyrus even to this day. I think I maybe respect him more than I hate him. Probably on this side of the camp, where Zephyrus is a really, really cool design. And for the most part, I think I'm glad he's in the game. So moving on here to Zephyrus's sort of older brother here for Highlander cards, it's OG Reno Jackson. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I really want Reno on this list. I think he's fine, but I don't know if he's like great design as far as I'm concerned. A couple things. I always felt like the flavor of Reno was weird. Why is this like adventurer dude healing your hero to full? That sounds like something that's super iconically priest or paladin or some really holy style character. Now, we found out later he's a dragon, but he's not even a bronze dragon, which we typically associate with healing, or a red dragon like Alexstrasza. He's a blue dragon, which is like, yeah, he's a mage, I guess, later. Like, I don't know. The flavor is just all over the place on Reno. I've always kind of explained it as like, he's like stolen the treasure and he's, getting away with his life at the last second, escaping the boulder or whatever, and that's him healing to full. But even that's like weird. I don't know. So anyway, flavor aside, because design is a balance between flavor and mechanics. Mechanically speaking, for Reno Jackson, I don't even know if he was good for the game either, because it's just so high variance. Like, I love, of course, control decks that are able to shut down aggro decks. I love those stabilization moments. Those are some of the best feeling experiences that Hearthstone has. But it's just like so all in, all or nothing with Reno. You either hit him on 6 and you win the game, or you don't, and often you'd lose the game. And I don't know if I like those really spiky, high variance sort of situations. So it is cool that you had to build your deck around him, and that was our first example of Highlander and Hearthstone. So I'm glad that he ushered in that kind of deck. I think it's been more or less good for Hearthstone to have that variation and have that spin on things, even though it's been too good on occasion. So Reno did a lot of great things, but I don't know that I like the high variance draw impact that he has. That like saving grace kind of moment isn't always great feeling on either side. So I probably wouldn't put him on this list, but here he is somewhere inside the top 5. Moving on to number 3, this one's Doomsayer, and I totally agree with this one. In fact, I probably biased this one because I think I included it as an example in the poll, so maybe some bad science there. He might be a little higher than he should be because of me personally influencing your minds out there. But I love Doomsayer so much. He's just a great flavor fit, as the commenter here describes. The end is coming sort of scenario, and then boom, the end actually comes and things blow up. Like, that's a really cool fantasy to deliver on. But just mechanically speaking as well, it's really cool to have a card like this that creates dilemmas for your opponent and creates problems. And it's like, I think he's just so perfectly balanced at 7 health, because it's like sometimes they manage to get 7 and sometimes they have like exactly 6. And it's kind of crazy how often the breakpoints line up perfectly, where it's like, oh, it was just right there or just not quite there, so that you can play those just naked tempo Doomsayers. And you've also got, of course, combinations with things like Frost Nova, where Doomsayers maybe a little bit more frustrating than good, but that's not really Doomsayer's fault. That's Freeze and Frost Nova's fault. But it is cool that he can make really high impact plays. And he's a card that we've, of course, seen fall into a lot of control decks throughout the day. Any kind of stall deck is able to run Doomsayer really nicely. And even though he's very powerful and he sometimes totally shuts down your game plan, for some reason I never feel like annoyed by it, because it just feels honest. It feels like it's fair. So this is one of those cards where it just feels like everything about it's like exactly right, which is hard to do. But sure enough, Doomsayer, I think he deserves a spot in the top 3. So moving on here to the number 2 spot, no surprise at all on this one. I think Defile is widely considered perhaps the best design card in Hearthstone. Every time I've read any kind of forum thread or asked you guys about it, Defile always comes up as a great Hearthstone design, and I completely agree. It's this incredible card that requires so much thought, strategy, planning, board manipulation, and then when you do manage to line it all up and things go perfectly, it's just like the best feeling in Hearthstone. It's like, I did it. I wiped this entire board, and it's this just puzzle that you have to solve every time, as the commenter puts it, and it's just so rewarding. And like, yeah, sometimes it's frustrating. It's like, I can't figure it out. I don't know how to trade. I don't miss doing that on stream all the time, by the way. That was always extra stressful. And you have moments where it fails, but you still feel like it wasn't the card's fault. It was yours. It's like you let the card down. The card didn't let you down. And that's just perfect. I want more cards like that in Hearthstone, where you're strategically rewarded for being careful and thoughtful and maybe a little smarter than the average bear. So Defile, everybody agrees. It's just perfect Hearthstone design. It's one of the most rewarding, fun, and powerful cards we've ever had, and it absolutely probably deserves the number 1 spot. But before we get into the number 1 spot, let's talk about our sponsor for this video. It's Keeps. Yeah, if you didn't know, 2 out of 3 guys will suffer some form of male pattern baldness by the time they're 35. I'm creeping up on that number. I know from YouTube stats, a lot of you are as well. And the best way to prevent hair loss is to do something about it while you still have some. And the good news is you can get treated from home. Talk to a doctor online, get the medication sent straight to you. That's perfect for this world we're in right now. So if you're noticing that you're losing your hair, do something about it. For a limited time, you can go to keeps.com/Regis or click the link down there in the description below, and you'll get 50% off your first order. All right, so number one, I was kind of shocked here. It's Zilliax. Unity, precision, perfection. And I mean, yeah, Zilliax, I will say he's like the most harmless OP card ever. And what I mean by that is that like Zilliax was played in more decks than any card I've ever seen. He was in 50% plus of decks, which is just crazy high historically. Most of the like best cards peak out at like 20, 30, 35%. Zilliax, his entire lifespan was in basically everything. And that makes him overpowered by most metrics, right? It's just if he's being played that much, there's something about him that's too good. But on the other side of things, he never felt too good. He always felt exactly fine. He was really probably the perfectly balanced Hearthstone card in that he was so good and felt awesome to play, and he fit into so many different decks, but he never felt super duper frustrating or overpowered. And I complain a lot in Hearthstone about like power spikes and really high variance situations where things, go from 0 to 60 instantly. Zilliax was the opposite of that. It's like you knew he was there, you knew what was happening. He had an impact, but it was like limited. It's like 6 health. That's not that crazy. It's trade into a 3/3. That's not that crazy. You could kind of just understand it and play around it and fit it into your game plan, whether you're the one playing him or playing against him. He was just kind of a known factor and entity, and he never felt bad or OP or anything. It just kind of existed and still good enough to be played, but not so good that you hated him. That's a weird spot to be in, and I think it's just a sign that despite all the crazy keywords tossed onto this card, somehow just the way they're balanced across situations and decks and metas, it all landed exactly right. In a way, it was perfectly precise, and somehow that brought us all together in unity and harmony. Zilliax, according to you guys, is the best designed Hearthstone card of all time. Now, for the record, I'd probably put Defile number 1. Maybe Zilliax would make my list. I think he's kind of straightforward in his design. Just like toss a bunch of keywords in. But you do have to respect the balance aspect. So he probably does deserve a spot on this list. That said, if you guys think there were some cards missing that deserve to be here, certainly share those down in the comments below. If you think people are crazy and you hate one of these cards, share that take too. If you enjoyed this kind of video, certainly, consider maybe thinking about subscribing to the channel. I'm going to ask more polls and ask more of you guys for certain kinds of lists and deliver more videos exactly like these. So stay tuned for those in the future. But until then, thanks so very much for watching. And until next time, game on.